This is Joyful Enriquez, and welcome to the Blue Palette Podcast. This is the podcast bringing you inspiring stories from professional marine artists and creatives around the world. This podcast is sponsored by the American Society of Marine Artists, a nonprofit whose purpose is to recognize, encourage, and promote marine art and maritime history. Hey there, thank you for joining me today for this episode of the Blue Palette Podcast. This is Joyful Enriquez, and I'm very excited that artist Holly Bird will be joining us on today's episode. I just wanted to share a little bit about her and give you a preview of what her work is like. Holly is actually a printmaker and a printmaking and design instructor that lives in Palm Harbor, Florida. After graduating from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Design and Graphic Design, her earlier careers in design and illustration ranged from storyboarding 5 feature films to magazine illustration and art direction. She is currently head of the printmaking department and on the board of the Dunedin Fine Arts Center in Dunedin, Florida. She is also a Roycroft Renaissance Master Artisan at Large and a Roycroft Arts and Craftsmen Guild juried artist in East Aurora, New York, working with the American Arts and Crafts Movement revival with other printmakers and artisans. Here you see just a little preview of some of her pieces here. I'm so excited that she's going to be joining us today to talk a little bit about her art career and who she is and part of her story. So I just want to officially welcome you, Holly. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Joyful. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'd love to start off with today just hearing a little bit more about your background, the development of your career, a little bit about your education. There's some really wonderful things in your bio that I would really love for you to highlight. So I'm going to turn it over to you and just share with us a little bit about how you got started.
Sure. It's funny because I had other ideas about being an artist or not being an artist. And I really wanted to go into the sciences, and I wanted to be a blimp pilot, and I wanted to be a marine biologist, and, all these things. And everybody's like, you're going to be an artist. And I felt like it's your destiny. And of course I was fighting destiny because I didn't want people to tell me what I had to do with the rest of my life. So I sort of backed into being an artist in a lot of ways. And, because I was interested in everything, I drew all the time. And I think that's probably the single biggest thing that propelled me, was the fact that I was drawing from the time my parents say, like, I was 3 or 4 years old, and it was my favorite thing to do, and just put on headphones or listen to my dad's records and draw, just lie on the floor and sit there with a piece of paper and draw what I was listening to, basically. And I was a horse nut, and I drew like crazy. So everybody thought I would be destined to be an artist. I went to University of Florida thinking I was going to be going to the biological sciences, and that didn't work out. At the same time, I was taking a lot of humanities and art history, and I was enrolled in the art program at University of Florida. And that was sort of my backup plan that turned out to be the main one. And I had been taking, obviously taking art in high school and everything like that. And I had some printmaking experience in Florida schools, because they actually taught, I had an etching class at one point, had an etching opportunity, woodcut. They were covering some old school printmaking in my classes. And we had an art director come to speak to my senior class. And I was kind of fascinated by that because, on the other hand, while I was looking into being a marine biologist, I really wanted to paint a record album cover. So I'm really torn, at this point. I could go another direction. So, as it turned out, I did enter the graphic design program at University of Florida, my upper division. It was a junior program, and I submitted a portfolio and got accepted. And in all that, I really wanted to be an illustrator. At that point, I had enough art classes behind me. Like, well, I really love to be an illustrator. Illustration was huge in the late 70s, early 80s. I was looking at the covers of magazines, album covers, things like that. School was really hostile to illustration. That's an understatement. I was called a Kmart artist by one of my professors. And I had a professor who said, "You just want to be a comic book artist, don't you?" And I went, I would. And I should have, and I would have been one of those pioneering women and, basically in the
Mm,
late 70s and early 80s and, in the comic book field because I loved it. I loved black and white line art, and that
wow.
black and white line art is kind of a direct path to the kind of printmaking that I've done and also
Wow.
logo design and illustration work that I've done. So I had this self-taught foundation early on in
Mm,
drawing, and that can take you anywhere really in the arts in a lot of ways. I think I'm a strong advocate of early drawing instruction,
mhm.
for anybody wanted to go in the arts and painting or whatever, or 3D or anything, and understanding that. But anyway, so I actually have been working in the design field, as it turns out, from my first job out of high school on through college. I worked in the graphic design office at the
Wow.
school, and I was the art director of the student newspaper, and I did cartoons. And so despite all of my no, I'm not going to be an artist, here I am working as an artist. I just threw in the towel, and I'm an artist. Okay, fine, designer. But funny thing happened while I was I just finished up my freshman year, and it was my
Mm.
the summer in between before I went into my sophomore year. It was like 1979, and I'm home from school for summer break, and I'm in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm working for Burdine's department store, which was dreadful. And
Oh,
it's one of those things, you need to make money for school.
right.
And I was 2 weeks into it, and I got a call from an old neighbor of ours, and this was Ted Swanson, and I babysat their son. My parents were friends with. They were a couple doors down where we lived in Fort Lauderdale. He happened to be the production manager of Rocky, and he
Wow.
calls me up and said, "So, are you still doing that art thing at school?" And I actually went to school with his daughter Holly, also named Holly, who was in the School of Art.
Wow.
So he apparently asked her if I was around. She says, "Oh yeah, she's still doing that art thing." So he calls me up. "What are you doing?" I told him I'm working for a department store. He said, "Would you like to come and work on a movie?" And I said, "Yes." Like this was a question or something
Amazing.
like that. Yeah. So he said, "Well, come on, bring your portfolio and do an interview. Come to the office. It's in Davie, Florida." And this movie was Caddyshack. And I interviewed with Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny, and they flipped through it and said, "Hey, you're hired." And they said, "What do you want?
Wow.
What do you want to be paid?" And I named some what I thought was an exorbitant amount, 5 times minimum wage. Woo! And they snickered and said, "Sure." So yeah, I mean, I'm young and stupid. I'm 18, so
Right, right. You just
the
don't.
greatest summer job of all time. I
Wow.
followed Harold Ramis around with a clipboard, and the first day on the job, I said, "Hey, I've never storyboarded a movie before," and he said, "Well, it's okay. I've never directed before, so we'll figure this out together."
Oh
And
my goodness.
it was amazing because I gave myself a crash course in storyboarding a film. I was a massive Star Wars fan when
Mm,
it first came out. I was there the Wednesday night, won tickets, and so I knew what storyboards were because I read everything I could on pre-production on Star Wars, and this was
mm,
probably one of the first films that had a lot of dissection of pre-production
mm.
the conceptual art that went into it. So I knew what a storyboard was. I know what it was meant to do. I asked Harold. I mean, basically, I'm asking framing questions and camera moves of Harold, and he's telling me, and he's figuring it out too. And I did layouts and floor plans and camera angles for him and maps and then storyboarded key scenes, and it was wonderful. And that
Wow.
getting that one credit, and I'm not credited. I actually had to apply to IMDb. I have my shooting script, my call sheet, I have my crew list with all contact and phone numbers, and I submitted scans of all that to IMDb and said, "Yes, you were there. We made some phone calls," and that was that led having that first credit
Wow.
led to me being known as one of the very few storyboard artists in the Southeast United States basically in the early
That's
80s.
amazing.
It is amazing when I think about it because storyboarding is so massive now, and
Yeah.
hardly anybody did it. Hardly anybody knew what it was, and a
Mm,
lot of directors, because of that sort of auteur thing that came out in the late '70s, with directors, where nobody can tell me what to shoot. I don't want to be
mm,
locked down with a plan. And storyboards were kind of old school from the old studio system, and so they turned their nose up at it, except for like Spielberg and company and Lucas. relied on it because they are a money and time saving feature. If you can
Mm.
plan out, if you are renting a crane and you know you need it for 3 days, you only want to shoot all the scenes that need the crane during that time period.
Right.
You want to organize your schedule, and that's one of the reasons you have storyboards. They're an organization tool. They also map out stunts and scenes
Mm.
with special equipment, and then you literally put them up on the wall back then. Now everything's different, but back then it literally was you walk in an office and the
Yeah.
storyboards are on the wall, and they're grouped
Wow.
in shots, and they're copied on the copier, distributed to the DP and everything. So this led to a couple of the calls down the line, and at that point, I had now graduated University of Florida right in the middle of the last big recession. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I went right to work from, doing this cool job and being the art director of the Independent Florida Alligator to working for a box company designing polymer dyes for $5 an hour in Jacksonville. That was super not awesome, and it was
Wow.
like, wow, why did I go to school for this? But
Right.
you know, it is what you make of it. And the whole time, I continued to build my portfolio in illustration.
Mm.
I built portfolio items. I submitted to newspapers and magazines, and I did whatever local West Coast of Florida, Tampa Bay area ad agency work I could get my mitts on, and I worked
Wow.
for a couple of small firms at the same time because you just couldn't afford to be choosy. There were so
Yeah.
few high end marketing, ad agency jobs that at that point all the design magazines, everybody's like doing laser tag in the hallways and working in living and working in like a refurbished barn and having this awesome life. Well, that was not happening in Tampa Bay, Florida in the
Yeah.
early 80s, post-recession and everything. So,
Wow.
you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And I
It
was trying
sounds
to
like you had to be very entrepreneurial
very
and
entrepreneurial.
very, very much a go-getter to
Mhm.
find opportunities for yourself. And I can't imagine, especially, the way things are now, what it must have been like for you in the 70s,
Yes.
being, young and in some
Mhm.
ways like having limited experience and then being a woman, what
Mhm.
that must have been like for you kind of in that industry and the
Yes.
challenges that must have come with that.
Yes, it was unpleasant at times. It really was. And
Mm.
the film industry, like I said, I only did 5 feature films. I
Mm.
only was on set for limited amounts of time, from 2 weeks to 2 months, then
Yeah.
I'm done. Obviously, it's legendary for sexism on sets. It's in a class unto itself. But the advertising
Mm.
business, the job interviews I did just to have a designer job, just a standard graphic designer on staff or junior art director, associate art director, and being interviewed and being asked, "Are you going to have children? Are you married?
Mm.
What are your plans?" I'm like, which was just so out of bounds, to
Right.
ask anybody that. And because clearly they didn't want to hire anybody, and a young woman who was, well, you might get pregnant. And they literally would tell you this to your face, which was definitely not in my plans, but it was none of their damn business. And they would feel
Right.
free to ask that all the time. And,
Mhm.
I've been in tons of meetings where, I get mowed right over in conversation, and people, I'll have an idea, it will be said across the room by the guy, all the classic stuff, it's all there, all this, it's not, this stuff really happened. And
Yeah.
it happened more or less constantly. And you had to,
Mm.
I learned to not be quiet. I learned to stand
Mm.
up for myself, and you had to, because I'm really an introvert. I mean, I'm that's not my normal self. And but I had to learn
Mm.
to step up and speak up for myself.
Mm.
And especially with freelance clients, just getting paid, just insisting that I get paid for the work I get done,
Wow.
especially with a client. And I remember this guy, I'm arguing with him like, I did the changes as noted, I delivered the product as noted according to the specs.
Right.
I want my money. And he literally called me a ball buster before he handed a check over, and with all this guys smirking in the background, and that's the kind of stuff I got to put up with. It was
Yeah. Wow.
unpleasant, but standard for the time. And that's, you just dealt with it, and you move on, and you just keep it. You don't let it stop you.
Mm. Well, I gotta say it. I have a lot of, we haven't known each other super long. I mean, we met through ASMA a few years ago at
Mhm.
the Marine Arts Conference. But I gotta say, just even just from this little conversation we've had and the few times we've talked, that I just have tremendous amounts of respect for not only the type of work that you do, but the person that you are, and even and the challenges that you've had to overcome. Because in a lot of ways, that people like you have paved the way for people in my generation, that it's, not that it doesn't have its challenges, but it's much easier, I think, in some ways, because of
what happened
what you've
before. And
done.
I have to say, in that
Yeah.
respect, my mother, who was a costumer in the film business and started out as a set nurse and one of her jobs was Miami Vice. And she worked the last 4 seasons of Miami Vice. She got in as a union set nurse. She's an RN. But then what she really wanted to do was costuming, and she moved that over because she'd been doing it for pickup work on Broadway shows coming to Fort Lauderdale. And when she bought her condo at the time she was making that kind of money, she could not get a mortgage because she was a freelancer technically, and because of her past, and because before she couldn't even get a credit card. That's no lie. You could not get a credit card as a woman until the mid 70s. She
Wow.
actually had to have a character reference from somebody on Vice, that she was who she said she was, that she made the money that she was making, and to have the bank, basically get a mortgage, allow her to get a mortgage. That's the
Wow.
kind of nonsense that was happening in 85, 86.
So crazy.
So it is so crazy. And because she also did what she did, she was in WAMPI, which was Women in Film, and they had to fight for every inch on a set with the sexism that was involved.
Wow.
And she was in there, and she also had to lie about her age, just to be able to continue to work in the field, because she pretended she was in her late 40s for 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Anybody knew how old she was? We were just talking about this because she's going to be 88 soon.
Wow.
And talking about her passport, which is still valid, and we're kind of talking about her Florida ID and everything. But she had to continually, everybody asked her how old she was, and she would give an inch, and she was terrified she'd lose her job, and she would, because everybody wanted, if you're over 40, even when I was in the television business in the late 90s, people look at you funny when you're not either a creative director at 40 at another station. Why are you still here? Literally, you would be asked, especially if you're a woman, why are you here? Why have you not moved on? And I was a senior designer here in Tampa at WTVT. And the way it works is, like, if you're not a creative director by 40, you're kind of washed up in the field, because we want younger talent to come in. And it was kind of hilarious because at one point I was an intern at a TV station, WFLA in 8, and I was trying to get a job in broadcast, and I didn't until finally in 1990 I started freelancing for a local TV station. I did their in-house viewer magazine, out of on my Mac.
Wow. Yeah.
In my home studio. It paid for itself. I just bought a new Mac for the first time, and I got this magazine, and I freelanced for him for almost 2 years, and finally I got hired as a senior designer there. And it turns out the creative director was a classmate of mine at University of Florida. And
wow, what a small
yeah,
world.
that worked out well. But I remember going in to see the new general manager with, Jim, the creative director at the time, and we were in our late 30s. But when this new guy came in, he was younger than we are, and he's looking us up and down, and he literally said, "I'm surprised that you don't have any tats or piercings." And we said, "Excuse me." And he said, "Well, I was expecting some much younger, given, what you guys have been doing here, because we actually had some pretty award-winning work. We had, we were winning awards at the BDA in our level TV station. We competed with, we were, we were Emmy judges at some point, regional Emmys, and we were pretty proud of our accomplishments. But for some reason, they thought, well, surely younger people are doing work of this caliber." I'm like, wow.
Okay.
Wow, that's
ageist.
very interesting. Some ageism there, yes.
Yeah.
But that the business, both television and film, it's a young field, and you can't look old and you can't act old, and especially women, because there's always somebody gunning for your job, and it's highly competitive and it's very stressful. And just having that experience of doing storyboarding I did um, Caddyshack, and I did Long Gone, which was an HBO movie, and about baseball in downtown Tampa. I did Cocoon: The Return, uh,
Yeah.
which was awesome. Actually, that was the greatest, film experience, film set experience, because I just got my union card, and I went from working 100-hour weeks to like 9 to 5, because the cast had it in their contract that all the
Mm,
above the line directorial staff and management were off work at 5 p.m. So I drive up to Miami Vice and have dinner with mom.
that's
It's pretty,
amazing.
it's pretty amazing. But
Yeah.
and then there were a couple HBO films after that. But I realized by 90 that I did not want to do this any more than I had been. It was
Mm,
not fun. And
mm,
also I really wanted to get my mitts on the technology. And at this point, Macs were really coming up. I was
yeah.
excited as an art director and as a graphic designer. I didn't want to work in a dingy barn on a set someplace and draw by, a 60-watt light bulb, because
Yeah.
out there on location, it's pretty low tech. And I remember helping the accounting staff in Cocoon 2 in the main office there in Coral Gables, and they're unpacking their Mac SEs, and like, we don't know how to install the software. And I'm like, pardon me, I can help here. So I loaded all their software in, I got them all up and running. And then I
Mm,
went back to my dingy warehouse to storyboard, and like, well, hey, I want to work in Max too. So if I stay in
mm.
the film business, they're too far behind on location for me to
Wow.
do that. And then surreptitiously, that's when I got the freelance job. And then I was hired to work as a senior designer all through the 90s at a television station.
Wow.
And that was awesome, getting a regular paycheck, a climate control. Um, no one yells at you, which was
Right?
amazing. Yeah, because yelling was a acceptable form of doing business on a film set, and also
Wow.
the wild west of agency work, and so it was
Mhm.
a great job. So yeah, I was
Wow.
fortunate.
So how okay, so you've had all this,
Mhm.
experience in so many wearing so many different hats,
Yeah.
have all these experiences. How did that then translate into transitioning into doing what you do now with printmaking, and how has some of those experience influenced what you do now?
Well, I think it really has informed my ability to be a printmaker. For one
Mm,
thing, as a designer, I was a print designer, back
yeah.
in the last gasp of print graphic design in the 90s, and working in magazines. And so as an art director, I mean, and a lot of times I had to be kind of a lone ranger. I didn't have a big staff. If I had a staff at all, I had 2 or 3 people helping do paste up and production
Mm.
work. And so I had to teach myself pre-press. I remember sitting at Tampa Bay Life magazine, Tampa Bay New Homes magazine, and I had been pasting up both magazines, and I was working with another art director there. I had New Home, she had Tampa Bay Life, and all of a sudden they come in carrying these big boxes, and they put Mac 2s on our desks, and they say, "You will put out the next issue in 4 color, doing digital prepress, basically outputting to film digitally instead of pasting up type galleys." And then shooting them in a camera and then taking them to the printer. And doing color separations by
Wow.
hand, or by the SEP house, basically. So we did a crash course in PageMaker at a corporate center, and I ended up like asking all the important questions and then basically teaching the class. And I'm not
Wow.
saying that to be snotty. It's just
Yeah.
that the combination of understanding prepress and PageMaker, because PageMaker, all of the software that you see that uses an artboard and margins, and these are all holdovers from PasteUp in the analog days
Mm,
of graphic design. And you can find an analog in every program, whether it's InDesign or Affinity Designer or Affinity, if any of those are
yeah.
based on the analog era. And so I had a deep
Wow.
understanding of that. And so when it came to starting a new file or whatever like that, like, oh, I mean, this is making sense, perfect sense. So I went on to do corporate training, on the side.
Wow.
The thing is that I didn't turn down any opportunity to build skills.
Mm,
So my experience with printmaking directly relates to this, because this is about color separations. This is about trapping colors under one another so that there is an overlap and there isn't like a white space showing. This is about, keeping things, margins clean, understanding layout. of a page, understanding, frankly, all the art history that I had in my
Wow.
training as a graphic designer, because I not only was required to have enough art history to have a minor if they allowed it, I just really enjoyed art history. And
Mm.
I also took every humanities class I could possibly take. And when I taught graphic design, because I actually left television, I was already starting to teach nights at a local, trade school, basically, before I taught at USF. And I was telling students, I mean, the best designers out there are the ones who are basically fascinated and curious about absolutely everything. And you
Mm.
should be interested in everything. You should be interested in history. You should be interested in economics. You should be interested in, internationally, in all the humanities around the world. I mean, in every art style that you could possibly come up. Go to
Mm.
museums, read books,
Mm.
read. I mean, reading is important. Just knowing current events,
Yeah.
what's happening in the world. I think all this has to be synthesized in your head, and so that when you can put something down on the page, it's informed by
Mm.
you and your past experiences, but also your ability to research and be aware of what's going on in the world. Because for one thing, there's a lot of pitfalls. I mean, you don't want to
Mm.
make. I see a lot of um, mistakes out there, and let me give you an example of things that can go horribly wrong when you have
Yeah.
designers that aren't aware of stuff. There is a commercial right now with Ewan McGregor, and he is it's a travel commercial. I don't know if it might be Airbnb or something like that, but anyway, he's walking through a fake set, and there are astronauts hanging there on cables, pretending to be doing a TV show about astronauts. The astronaut in the foreground is wearing an Apollo 1 patch. Apollo 1 is where all three astronauts died in a terrible, tragic accident when the oxygen, the pure oxygen in the
Yeah.
cockpit caught fire, and it was terrible. To see that Apollo 1 patch in that commercial was frankly horrible. And a lot of
Yeah.
people made really, but you can see there's a bunch of dumb decisions that were made for that to
Yeah.
actually happen. And it was actually pixeled out in later, viewings. I noticed somebody finally caught that. But you
Yeah.
have to know that. But
Yeah.
there were so many people that didn't know that about Apollo
Mm.
1 for that to happen in a very expensive commercial. Designers should know stuff like that. You should be able to
Yeah.
catch things culturally before they go out there in the broad world. And I mean, just even stuff being a broadcast designer, because we were doing up to the minute stuff, the over the shoulder graphics.
Mm.
I was kind of helping to supervise the paint box crew, which were in charge of doing all the graphics for over the shoulder for every broadcast. And I was also the news liaison. I go to the week ahead meetings. We talk about the news shows coming up, what's happening, current events, and then we would have to have these images ready to go. On say there's a trial, say there's this or that, we have to have these
Yeah.
in the box, finished, done, ready to put text on.
Wow.
And I would see things that not just misspellings, but also like that word does not mean what you think it does.
Right?
My favorite one is diffuse the bomb, DIFFUSE.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
I'm looking at the phone and yelling at my paint box staff, DEFUSE. And I went to the bookstore. This is before the internet, grabbed a giant dictionary, plopped it on the disc there. And if you're not sure, please look it up. But
Right.
there's just stuff that when I taught design, that this is all stuff that you kind of have to be aware of. But I'm getting ahead of myself here because all that art history also landed me into the world of graphic illustration, historic graphic illustration, and that
Mm.
included the early 20th century and the introduction of Japanese woodcut prints to Europe, and how they became hugely influential in American design of the early 20th century, which was also Art Nouveau, which was the American arts and crafts movement,
Mm.
and how American printmakers embraced this clean look of graphic design in their prints, and how they were able to take this process, especially European printmaking, woodcut linoleum using oil-based inks. Well, then all of a sudden, Japanese prints were on the scene, and they were done by a four-man team, I should say, originally, and then people in the new print movement, the Shinhanga movement, said, "We don't need four people to do this. I can do this by myself." Women in America they realized that they could take a piece of linoleum, which was invented in 1890, carve a design, print these things in multiple colors or hand color them and then sell them right out of the kitchen while they're also running a household.
Wow.
I was starting to read things like this, and
Mm,
in the back of my mind, because I had that initial experience in high school with printmaking, and then in college I took etching, and I loved etching.
mm.
Copper plate. Actually, we did zinc etching back then, but because we did zinc etching over open vats of nitric acid, I'm like, well, I'm never doing this again at home.
That
This
sounds
is
dangerous.
crazy. Yeah. I mean, sitting there with a feather, and fumes, and like, of course, we're
Oh
immortal
my
back then because we're
oh my
19 or
goodness.
20. And I was working up there till 3 o'clock in the morning in the printmaking room, and I lost track of time and I loved it. And then I realized, oh
Wow.
my God, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm by myself in the entire
Uh-huh.
building. And then I jump on my bike and then I would just barrel home as fast as I could
Mm,
through red lights and everything and just like not stopping for anything. But that's where printmaking took me in college because it was really it was not design, it was not graphic design and advertising where I'm doing cereal boxes. I'm doing some really cool printmaking and I loved it. But I thought, well,
mm,
it's etching. I'll never do this again. But I never lost track of that
mm.
feeling that I had when I was doing printmaking. And my abilities as a graphic designer, because of the mechanics of printmaking, were like second nature. So I was already familiar with thinking backwards. An
Mm.
image flipped backwards, into
Right.
negative, the whole thing. My mindset in print was already there. So fast forwarding, I've left television. It's gotten crazy. I can't do this anymore because I was starting to go home and answer the phone, art department. So that's when I knew, it's time to leave. And I was teaching at that point. Like I said, I,
Mm,
I, I taught there and I taught at USF. And I also, to save my sanity, I'm like, I really need to just take some art classes.
mm,
I took open painting, which I was terrible at, acrylic painting. And I also took figure drawing, which was fantastic because it's like boot camp for artists.
mhm.
I had developed some bad habits and shortcuts as an illustrator, and Monday night figure drawing with quick change and long poses really set me straight. And every once in a while, I need to go back to that. But
Yeah.
also, I took a printmaking class from Stephen Littlefield here at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center, and he was teaching both copperplate etching in ferric chloride, which is so much safer, and linoleum block printmaking. And I took to it again like a duck to water. It was familiar. It was coming home. I had, I'd done some other things in colored pencil, whatever, but I'm the slowest artist in the world. And I took printmaking again, and it was like it just was a fit. It just
Mm,
felt good. And
mm,
it taps into all that background as a graphic designer, all that
mm,
background as an illustrator, distilling an image into
mm,
its most simple shapes and forms, and flat areas of color, open, positive, negative space. The black and white image has to work first before you add color, which was always the precept of doing a logo design. A logo has to work in one color only first. And if it doesn't work in one
right.
color and you can't tell what's going on, don't even start with the color aspect of it. So
Right. Wow.
very much hand in hand. Yep.
Mm, wow. I think a lot of people don't even realize how much goes into influencing your art, that it's not just studying one aspect of
Hmm.
life or medium or whatever, but
Yeah.
as you're explaining, all these different experiences that you've had have really gone into influencing and the whole process of what you're creating, and then the final outcome.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean,
all
we are
these.
we are the sum of, everything we've done and lived and experienced and read and seen. And it should come out in your art in some way, shape, or form. It just informs your artist. I think we um I I am a better printmaker at this late stage in my life because I didn't discover it again until my mid 40s,
Mm,
than I would have been had I gone straight out of, basically my bachelor program at a grad school. I simply would not have enjoyed it as much. I wouldn't
yeah.
have put the work into it, because the work that goes into, let's say for linoleum or woodcut, there's the carving aspect of it, and this is the classic 10,000 hours, the five
Yeah.
years of training. Yeah, to train myself to
Right.
carve. And that craft, it's the fine craft aspect of it. But when I look at how I carved when I first started and how crude it is compared to
Mm.
how I carve now, as my eyesight is going, which is
Yeah.
another sort of race against time. But and that's what magnification is for, and custom reading glasses and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's you also have to have the maturity and the self-discipline to put in the time to learn these skills.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of skill-based art, and taking the time to learn technique, and
Right.
before you really put things to paper or canvas or the screen.
Right. It's the foundation that makes everything else work. It's like if you don't have the foundation
Hmm.
there and it's good, everything you might have like great textures or
Yeah.
great colors or but if the foundational elements aren't there, then it's not going to work out in the end.
And it won't be as good as it could be.
Right.
You may have great ideas, but if you don't stop and take the time to learn the skills that you really need to make them really blossom, and that your skills come to the level of your ideas,
Mm.
then you're going to be hobbled in a lot of ways. And so I think the impatience, I think, that younger artists have, and goodness knows
Mm.
I've seen that when I
Yeah.
taught taught graphic design, and I was teaching, actually I was teaching Photoshop and InDesign and layout on the computer, and everybody wanted to race to the keyboard and no,
Mhm.
no, no, I'm not going to do thumbnails. I'm not going to plan any of this stuff.
Right.
And I kept telling your first idea is your worst idea.
Mhm.
Work on refinements, do these, take them to the next level, just like I did with a client. But also this goes for us too, just as, fine artists and craftspeople and artisans.
Mm.
Refine that idea. And the idea of refinement comes right out of my discipline as an art director and a designer,
Mm.
because we would work everything out on tracing paper, old school.
Mm.
And it would start out as a thumbnail, make it a little bigger, flip over the tracing paper, refine it, refine that, scan it, refine it some more, now add color, do 3 or 4 color studies, work out your palette in advance. Because printmaking takes so much time.
Mm.
It's not fast art, it's slow art.
Right.
I'm investing heavily in the front end,
Mm.
with an idea or a scene or a concept. And it's not a question of it crushing the spontaneity, because there's no spontaneity in printmaking, unless you're doing monotypes or monoprints or something like that. That's
Yeah.
that's it. If you're carving 8 blocks out of woodcut,
Mm.
that's not a spontaneous art form. But if you refine and have a good idea, and you think that it will, let's say the 10, 15, 50, 25 prints, however ambitious you are, whether or not you have a proofing letterpress, or you're doing it by hand with a baron. It depends on how much work you want to do. But you want to know that that print is going to be appealing,
Mm.
however way you want it to be in general. Maybe it's topical or something like that. But you got to put in the work and the refinement and the planning. And the planning is what streamlines and makes your workflow
Mm.
efficient. And so that way you're not
Yeah.
carving any more than you absolutely have to.
Right.
You are determining the minimum number of either plates or blocks that you have to carve, and no
Mm.
more. Um, is this the color palette you really want to go with? If you're doing a reduction print, once you commit to that color palette, you're kind of stuck.
Right.
Um, and you're
There's no undo button.
There's no undo button, and that's an interesting point you bring up, the undo button. And or a multiple block, I can change my mind about the palette, but I can't change my mind necessarily about
Mm.
the block to the sequence or how I go. So
Mm.
having the ability and the patience to plan, refine, follow through, take it all the way, and then do your final. In printmaking, of this type of printmaking, the investment in time is very heavy up front. But once you have those multiples, the economic model of the business model of selling them is actually pretty great, because,
Mm.
as I mentioned before, I'm a terrible painter. I am never going to command any kind of real money for a painting. However, my
Mm.
prints over time, and I keep a logbook on everything,
Mm.
will pay out like a large painting,
Yeah.
over 5, 6, 7 years. And so I
Mm.
found, I mean, Albert Durer was right. he was a rock star. He really figured out the business model of printmaking early on in the
Mm.
16th century, and it still plays out for printmakers who are working in the field and selling and everything else.
Wow. Well, talking about all this stuff, I would love to look again at some of the pieces that you
Mhm.
sent me, and talk a little bit about, we've discussed some of the process, but I'd really love, just looking at some of these for you to walk us through kind of the whole process. Like, how do you
Sure.
start something like this
Mhm.
through to the finish, kind of in a, I don't know, a step by step. If there's a
Well,
like, is
sure.
there a set of steps that you kind of follow for every piece that are similar for each one?
Well, for
Or is
the
there
certainly
variation?
for the block prints, like this is, Ghosting Along, that's in front of us right here, and, I did that, 2018,
Mm,
2019, and, there are 6, 9 by 12 blocks. It's a lino cut, and it's
mm.
actually on mounted linoleum blocks, and, all
Wow.
of my, um I normally take all of my own photographic reference, and, I belong to the West Coast Trailer Sailing Squadron around here, and I have a little 13-foot melon seed, and it's a little traditional small skiff. And I
Oh,
take a camera
wonderful.
out with me, and my fellow squadron members tend to be builders and aficionados of small traditional sailing craft, very picturesque. This is a copy of a reproduction of Egret, which was a gentleman whose name is Commodore. Now I forgot. This flew out of my brain. Anyway, one of the pioneers of the city of Miami was a boat designer, a sailboat designer,
Mm,
and Egret was his small coastal cargo and mail carrying shallow water boat. And a gentleman had, a friend of a friend had taken a photo where this boat was actually way in the background, but there's something about the light that was
mm,
so amazing. It was early evening, glassy calm, no wind, and ghosting along is when you just have enough to push the sails out, and there's enough, just simply there's no real wind, but there's enough air just moving to push you
mm.
along, barely making a wake. And I thought the reflections were amazing, and I asked his permission.
It's beautiful.
Hey, if I can use this photo with your credit, and I would like to give you the first one with your permission and credit, if I could go ahead and use this photo to develop a block print. And they went, sure. And so I have done this several times down here with people
Mm,
who now have, print number one of a block print, based on this. If I couldn't get out there and take the photo myself, so I am looking for a couple of things here. I'm looking for high contrast. I'm
mm,
looking
yep.
for positive negative space. And if you look at how I have white on black, black on
Mhm.
white, this print succeeds in one color black only on its own without any color. That's another thing I aim for,
Mm,
that it can stand alone as a single key block in one color. And only then do I add color to it. And this is a little, I'd like to re-edition this block in subtler, more muted colors with maybe more of a graduated tint from a little bit lighter to the left, going a little darker to the right on a diagonal.
sure.
But I went ahead and finished out this edition, and it sold well. And
Mm,
if I re-edition it in completely different color, it will be a separate numbered edition. This
wow.
is one of the beauties of doing multiple block prints, because I can go back and keep the blocks and reprint them at a later date, or I don't have to do the entire edition all at once. I can go back, wait a year
Wow.
or two, keep notes on how I mix the inks, keep
Mm,
samples of everything, and then remix the inks and nail the colors again, and print a few more. But I do refinement after refinement. In this case, this particular cropping was a very tiny piece of the actual photo, and
wow.
when I did that, I'm looking for the strong triangles. I'm looking
Mhm.
for something that leads the eye right in. I'm looking for that, just that punch of color right there on the gentleman's, his jacket. And then I just worked out again the how many colors do I need to convey the scene, the feeling of calm, the
Mm,
feeling of quiet, on the smallest number of blocks that I actually have to carve. And
wow.
also you print light to dark. You print your lightest colors, usually your background, your sky first. And
Mm,
then you end up with the key block, which is the black or darkest block on top. So not only do I have to group in this case, because I printed this on a press, not by hand.
wow.
And so I have to still be able to fit a baron in between the colors. So when I had, say, the red on that block, I only had the red on that block. There's a little bit in the wake and a little bit in his jacket. So that's one entire block. Just the red area is the only raised area of that entire block. But in other areas where I had two colors, I had to make sure that there's enough separation that the brayer didn't touch the other color as I inked up each block.
Wow.
So yes,
So much to plan.
So much to plan. They have to be light colors grouped together, dark colors grouped together.
Wow.
And yes, I do use Photoshop. I used to use paper where I would color in with colored pencils and I mark everything up and I, basically clip it together and like a little flip book. Photoshop is wonderful for this because each layer becomes a block, and I label the blocks basically where my darkest block is at the top. It's the black key block. I scan that. I click multiply, which makes everything transparent underneath that black block. And I start putting each layer will be colored in like a coloring book underneath. Actually, I learned this technique from friends of mine who worked at CrossGen Comics in Oldsmar around 1999, 2000. There actually was a comic book company here in Oldsmar, Florida, that had drawn in a lot of people from DC and Dark Horse and Marvel Comics. And I'd wander around their bullpen and I looked at them, how they colored comics digitally on Photoshop. And this is exactly how they do it. Put in the darkest black outline on top, you hit multiply, everything's transparent beneath it. Then you basically do your flats underneath each one. And so this is the same way that I design a block print when
That's
I'm not
amazing.
doing it, by hand.
Wow. That's incredible. I really like the, I know you said you wanted to maybe reprint this one with different colors, but I really like the colors that you're using here.
Thanks. Yeah.
The subtle primaries. I think it works really well. The
Thank you.
composition, the color,
Thank you.
everything.
And,
I mean,
I didn't intend to go primary here. And I realized when I pulled my first proofs, I went, but I like it. It actually it wasn't my intention because it was actually more of a proofy palette. But then I went, well, it's bolder than I normally do, but it was striking. I liked it. Thank you. Yeah.
It works really well.
Thanks.
Now, was this the piece that you had? Is this the piece that you had exhibited at the Marine Arts Conference?
No,
in
actually,
Jamestown,
that
or
is an
no?
etching, and that is
Okay.
Kathleen, and that's in one of your other images here that you have. It's
Okay, let's look at that
it's an
one.
etching. There's Kathleen.
This
Okay,
one?
this one, yeah. So
This
this
one.
was at the 18th National Show, and it was juried in, which is I'm still like, wow. I mean,
It's
it was an
beautiful.
amazing honor to have a piece, especially in a small etching like this, jury into that show that went into Jamestown for the opening of the 18th National. And this is an 8x10 copperplate etching with aquatint. And again, it starts out with a photo that I took. I am cropping it constantly, looking for shapes, forms, basically something to lead the eye in. I want a great light source that can come in and create some interest and drama. I want the full range of values. I want the brightest whites, which are the white of the paper in an etching, to the darkest darks. And I built this up with a series of both hand etching, where like the dark of the hull is actually a series of tiny, tiny, tiny curlicues that are scribed in with a steel scribe on the copper plate through a ground, which is universal hard ground, which is a combination of asphaltum and beeswax. And it also has spray paint. There's a bit of coarser spray paint aquatint on here, which and this plate went through a number of disasters. And including, I actually accidentally dragged a framed print over the top of the plate, and I lifted up and I couldn't believe what I'd just done. I was in a hurry. It was one of those things, and I just stared at it because I can't believe I just did this. And now there's a scratch on my plate, and I have a show. And this was before the 18th show. But this is when I first developed the print.
Wow.
And I worked, so this is the magic of copper. And I teach copper plate etching on Friday mornings here at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. And copper is an amazing forgiving medium. You can't play stupid etching tricks with zinc the way you can with copper, but you can scrape out mistakes. You can go over it again, and you can disguise things. And one of the things about becoming a better etcher is learning to disguise your mistakes better than other people. I mean, it's not that you're a great printmaker. It's wow, I made a mistake, and now I need to hide that somehow. And because there's a whole lot of random elements that pop up with etching. I mean, you're it's crazy. This is again the Albert Dürer thing. This is you're coating a copper plate with a mixture of tar and beeswax, and then you're scribing through it to allow the ferric chloride, in our case, which is a slower acting corrosive salt. It has a acidic pH, but it's not an acid. Much safer, no fumes, much better medium to work in. I can do it at home. And then you have to, and this kind of crazy. It is medieval, it's a Renaissance technique.
Yeah.
But the random elements that you introduce into it, nothing works exactly as you expect, because
Mm,
we're doing things like timing. I have to make sure that the ferric chloride tank, the Baumé weight is 42, to make sure that my timing chart, like this grayscale will probably work if I dunk it in there for 1 whole minute, but I may not get this tone if it's in there for 3 minutes because
oh my
so
goodness.
but anyway, but that random stuff also allows for some pretty interesting effects that
Mm,
maybe you're not expecting, that you can incorporate into the final piece. So even though this went through a series of disasters, I'm very pleased about how it turned out.
yeah.
The stylization that you see, the spirals and the wake, that's kind of a signature thing that I do. I don't want to get bogged down in necessarily realism and etching because of the
Right.
tedium
Mm,
of the medium. Sorry about that. But it is that, but putting these spirals and having water move like this, it's a design element. Again, this is the graphic designer in me, that's popping out even in doing a copperplate etching.
wow.
So it's lurking under the surface. Can't help it.
Well, it's funny you say that because it's one of the things that I like the most about the previous piece where it kinda had those circular
Exactly.
spiral shapes, and
Yep.
in this one that I
Mhm.
think especially in the kind of the monochromatic tone of this piece that
Mhm.
gives it a very whimsical feel, which is
Thanks.
really endearing.
Mhm.
And
Thanks. Yeah.
it makes me wanna just be on that boat with them. I'm like, "Oh, they're having a great time," and they just look like they're
And
so
that's exactly
relaxed
it.
and peaceful and
And it also captures a moment because I was right next to them in my melon seed, and I had, like, the tiller up to my chin and my knees, and I'm holding the sheet, and I've got my camera with a long lens, and I'm trying to track them, I'm firing off shots, and also the boat's
Mhm.
moving, and we're on this lake in Florida, and there's people driving by and, putting up a big wake, and I'm waiting for the boat to settle down, but it was a great moment, it was a great day, it was a beautiful afternoon, and this particular boat, this Caledonian yawl that this couple, they built it, the 2 of them, and it
Wow.
is in reds and greens and with linen sails, and it's just one of the most beautiful boats I have ever
Mhm.
seen, crafted by them. They made everything out of wood together. They built this over a period of a year and a half, and it's just this beautiful artifact made by them, and a beautiful afternoon sailing, and I wanted to kind of get that moment out there in the
Wow.
etching.
Now with your work, do you focus a lot, in the etchings and the printmakings on marine themed pieces? Is that something that you do a lot of, that you focus on, or do you do a lot of different types of subject matter? I did see you, one of the pieces you included was
Mhm.
this dog here, but it's also marine, he's in a boat and it's on the
Yeah, and this
water.
is actually, I put this in and I sent this to you because this is actually a turning point for me in printmaking. This is earlier. This is 2012, and this was included in the Artist magazine uh, contest. Basically, this was an honorable mention in their kind of pets and wildlife category,
Wow.
and so it was printed in Artist magazine, that issue, that annual issue for the artist competition, and it also reflects a turning point in how I carved,
Mm,
how the quality of my carving. There are so many things I would change here, and this is one reason I wanted to give this to you, because I look at this now and there's a million things I would do differently. I would not have hard edges on some of these color areas
mm,
receding the background. Now, I eliminate black outlines with objects that recede in space. I just didn't think about that back then.
mm.
But I did a couple things here that were a little bit more challenging, and I would do more graduated tints. But that glow that's underneath the boat there, where there's reflection
Yeah.
bouncing off the ground, the bottom of the water, the sand, and bouncing back up again underneath the boat. Also, that when I said we print light to dark normally,
Mm,
I threw on a pale lavender overprint on top of this. I let it dry for 2 weeks. Again, this is oil-based inks, traditional oil-based inks, and then I
mm.
printed this lavender, the swirls. This is the debut of my swirls. This is the first time I
Oh,
had that
I
in real
love
life.
it.
So, and so this has a number of things that were very different for me, and it got notice. For the first time, one of my prints got local, regional, national notice. This went
Wow.
into the Florida Women's Museum of Art, that was over in not Sanford, but another a town. It was an actual museum that exhibited women's art in Florida for a time, and
Wow.
right on up through about 2015. This was selected one year for it.
Wow.
This went into again, like I said, the publication. This was my turning point when my printmaking no longer was sort of a happy, fun sideline, but I began to really start to exhibit in earnest,
Yeah.
start doing outdoor art shows, indoor art shows. I was sending pieces out for exhibits and juries and things, and I started to take it seriously finally at that point, that hey, okay, I'm freelancing, I'm teaching, I'm doing this, but now I'd really like to get serious about this as a working exhibiting artist, and do
Wow.
more printmaking. The boats, as you've noticed, tend to be more in my block prints, because the
Mhm.
block prints, like I said, they're a huge investment in time. They are. It is a every artist needs a niche. When I started looking at printmaking, particularly of this particular kind of more traditional, with a key block which has an outline over flat areas of color, it's the classic arts and crafts movement style. Almost everybody's doing landscape and florals, and no one's doing marine. And
Yeah.
I'm a lifelong sailor. I mean, I was my dad taught me to sail when I was about 7 years old. He was a boat manufacturing representative, so we always had a demo boat around,
Mm.
tied to the dock, and we lived on the east coast of Florida. I was right over there. I grew up in Brevard County near the Space Center, so I'm watching missiles go up, and I had a boat tied to the dock, and I'd be out there, sailing all the time solo. I mean, this is kind of back in the day when your parents did this. They say, "Hey, just be back by dark and carry a life preserver." So I'm out there at
Right?
11 or 12 years old, and I'm sailing all around Merritt Island, and I'm going up to the Penita Causeway, and I'm on my own, and I'm an independent kid. I'm just I'm an adventure kid,
I love
and
it.
it's what you did back then, which parents will never do these days, and it's a shame, because it again, that aspect of
Mhm.
independence also helped kind of build me, kind of my kind
Yeah.
of my abilities as an artist and everything. But yes, my block prints tend to be boats and marine, because that's sort of my niche in selling. And
Mm.
that kind of makes the business angle work, but also because it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart.
Mhm.
And I can only say, especially in this particular, it's a demanding art form. Like I said up front, the investment in time. You
Yeah.
need to do subject matter that you enjoy, that you really love.
Yeah.
Now, the etchings tend to be more personal. They tend to be more illustration, because I'm a frustrated illustrator. I missed it. I missed the tail end of the
Mm.
children's book golden age illustration heyday. I missed, album covers. I missed, all that stuff, the comic book
Mm.
field. I was always plodding along in advertising design and print
Mhm.
design. And because I was kind of stuck in Florida, I don't think people realize that until FedEx came along, that that was a milestone for freelancing, because
Mhm.
now you could actually send thumbnails and concepts to a client out of town, and get an answer back, and send your
Mm.
final art and ship it. And then faxes were revolutionary, because you can send
Mm.
concepts and thumbnails to a client back and forth, and approvals. The internet was massive, because then, but what it did, it turned your deadlines from a comfortable 2 weeks to work out concepts before you even
Aha.
start,
Yes.
for large money. I was getting $250 a piece for little tiny pen and ink illustrations for magazines with watercolor. Uh, Try doing that now. And then
Yeah.
you had a luxurious point of time. You had like weeks to work on it.
Mhm.
Nobody expected it until overnight
Yeah.
mail, and then the internet came along. But yeah, it's again, the illustration end of it, I missed the boat. I was in Florida. The centers for purchasing illustration were in Atlanta, they were in New York City, they're in
Yeah.
Chicago, they're in Minneapolis, but they were not in Tampa. I
Mhm.
had an agent for a time in Tampa who got me some great client work, like for Procter and Gamble, and some big corporate clients. And I did some. I mean, she was worth every penny of the 20% commission that I paid her, because back then in 85, 86, I mean, she was getting me very big jobs, but they were few and far between. And then she realized
Yeah.
she couldn't make any money in Tampa Bay. And of course, she moved up north, as
Yeah.
everybody did. And then all the ad agencies started consolidating, and all the
Mhm.
New York agencies bought out the ones in Tampa, and then that all dried up. So
Wow.
my need to draw is reflected in the etchings as opposed to the block prints.
Wow. So is there a couple questions, kind of a two-part
Sure.
question.
Yeah. Mhm.
Uh One, do you have any special projects that you're working on currently? And two, kind of like, where are you focusing your work right now? Like, are you doing shows? Are you exhibiting online? How do you basically like have taken what you love doing with these etchings and printmaking and everything, and have kind of turned that into, you know, something that you can take home at the end of the day and,
Mhm.
eat and make a living and all that?
Exactly. And so COVID changed everything.
Yeah.
I actually had a meeting this morning, had coffee with the new owner of my outdoor show rig. So an up and coming artist will be purchasing my 10 by 10 trim line booth because I've taken outdoor shows off the table.
Mhm.
And I am wanting to take that stress of being a solo exhibitor. And I used to pack up my Honda Element. I would put it on the auto train and go to New York with half of train ride in 8 hours to New York, and do outdoor shows out there too. Shows in
Wow.
Florida are getting I can count on being rained out at least one day of a weekend now, and I have works on paper. And with the
Right.
humidity down here, it's not really tenable for me as an
Mhm.
aging solo artist to put up this massive booth and then
Yeah.
deal with this kind of stuff. So I am happy to close the door on that now,
Mhm.
retaining some indoor display stuff and still doing some indoor shows and exhibits.
Mm.
So I am thinking about the physical aspect of how I'm going to sell my work.
Yeah.
I am pushing teaching harder. I just taught a week-long workshop last month up in the John C. Campbell Folk School in North Carolina, and
Oh,
I had a
wonderful.
fantastic time. That was,
Oh,
I mean,
that sounds so fun.
it was amazing, and it's a wonderful school, with a great history, on the Danish folk school system. It's the largest folk school in the country, and, I mean, I feel kinda bad because when I first heard about it, I'm like, "Oh, it's clogging, right?" So, no. Especially now that I've seen their print studio. They have a book arts and print studio that is state of the art, absolutely amazing,
Wow.
with amazing staff, admin, and fellow faculty. And I had a fantastic workshop teaching 8 students up there, with an assistant.
Mm.
And the view was glorious. The facility is glorious. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything better. And I would love to do more workshops. I mean, I am teaching at the Dean Fine Arts Center. I'd like to travel to do more workshops and teach.
Mm.
So teaching is a large part of it, pulling back on the outdoor show stress,
Yeah.
concentrating more on online sales. Like everybody, I need to completely revamp my website and do an online shopping site, because prior
Mm.
to this, I had a print agent which was another casualty of everything, COVID going
Yeah.
into it. And I'm also, at home. I have obligations at home, and I help my mom. And so, but that arrangement didn't make it through COVID. And that's one of the reasons I did not have an online sales presence, because having a print agent, which was frankly wonderful, because I didn't have to
Mm.
frame anything. I would just
Yeah.
ship out finished etchings and some block prints, and he would hit the galleries and sell for me. And that was a pretty pleasant arrangement. But now I'm free to do online sales, so that's another
Mm.
aspect of it. I've got to drill down on that.
Yeah.
Project wise, I'm continuing to refine my woodcuts more. I'm actually, behind me on my drawing table, there's actually a woodcut block, a 9 by 12 on there.
Yeah.
This is actually a pretty ambitious 8, maybe 9 block print. This is actually a linoleum key block, which is mounted on wood. So I have all the fine
Interesting.
detail of lino cut, which will be my final black key block on top of wood. So
Wow.
I'm planning on doing this by hand to get more texture out of it. So I'll do a hand glass and traditional Baron, with some thinned oil. I am going to try this in watercolor first. I'm going to try this as a Mokuhanga rice paste watercolor first to see how I like it, because I can go in any number of directions. And again, it's like, the fat over lean kind of stuff. If I start out with watercolor on these blocks, I can always switch to oil inks after that, after I play around with watercolor. But if I
Okay.
like the watercolor, the rice paste based traditional, gouache pigments, then I'll just stick with that and go with that addition. So I am trying something a little bit different, something a little bit less messy and time consuming and funner for me to, it's getting harder and harder to stand on the concrete floor and crank
Right.
out prints for 6 to 8 hours a day, because once I mix up those inks, I can't stop.
Right.
I mean, I can.
Wow.
It's the beauty of having oil-based inks. I can go have lunch, come back, the inks are still open, they don't dry, and I can continue working. But it's 90 minutes of cleanup, and I'm usually pretty beat by the time I'm done.
Mm.
And so I'd like to change up my workflow while getting more, a little bit more ambitious and intricate and larger in my prints. Try to increase the size a little bit, but also making it pleasant for me, and also I have to worry about hands, arthritis,
Yeah.
everything else now. So I am changing things up, and and keeping it challenging, and I'm always challenging myself. There's always a technical challenge in everything that
Mm.
I do, that I want to try this one thing and experiment, and oh, that was cool, so I'm going to take it to the next level the next time.
Wow. Well, I feel like I could just talk to you forever, but
And if
our
you
time
let me, I will. So yes,
there's
go.
like so many things. There's so many things we could talk about, and I feel like we've only
Thanks.
scratched the surface. But
Mhm.
thank you so much for sharing some of your story and your
Oh,
process.
thanks.
And our
Thank
time
you.
is kind of drawing to a
Sure.
close. So I
Hmm.
think to close out today, I would really like just if you could think of one or two things that you would like to share with our listeners. Like either a life lesson or a personal lesson or something from this experience that you've had, you know, such vast
Well,
experience you've had in life and art that you would like to leave with our listeners that would be encouraging or helpful to them, especially
well,
for people who might be interested in pursuing art.
Well, I would say, it is kind of more of a, live your life not just as an artist in front of a screen or in your basement or whatever. I really think it's important that, to be a better artist, to again, that conceptualizing, synthesizing things that you know and read and understand and see, means you have to get more experiences. And
Yeah.
whether that's outdoors, whether that's physical activity, whether you're backpacking. Also, I firmly believe, get involved in your community, volunteer. I was a scout leader for almost 10 years. I loved
Mm.
it. The high adventure aspect, I mean, I did 100-mile canoe trips, I did backpacking, I did all that sort
Wow.
of stuff. So I saw and did cool things that are a
Mm.
part of my visual library,
Mm.
that of and traveling to different areas of the country, and seeing. I mean, I'm in Florida, but having the chance to see different atmospheres, different cloud formations, water, running water, mountains, everything.
Mm.
Get outside, uh, get inside, and like I said, with I was on a couple of municipal boards, just dealing with the libraries and Parks and Rec as a county appointee, getting my hands dirty as a community volunteer. Um, Dealing with people, your people skills, I think
Mm.
are important to, I think you need to actually kind of get out of your comfort zone. And in order to be able to negotiate with people, get out there and actually interact in some way, shape, or form that takes you out of your comfort zone, both in life experiences and just talking to people and negotiating.
Yeah. That's very good. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I feel like every time I do one of these, I just learn a lot, and it's really encouraging to me personally, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners, just to hear
And
about some
I'm
of these
looking
things
forward
and
to
take it to heart.
hearing, yeah, the other podcasts as well, because I feel the same way about listening to other artists and talking about the work.
Well, thank you so much, Holly. I guess lastly, before we close out, I just want to give you an opportunity if there's somewhere else that your work is being exhibited currently or online where people can go learn a little bit more about you and some of your
Mhm.
current works that are available.
Well, right now it's kind of an in-between point. You could always go to my website at studioibis.com. That will be revamped a little bit here. I am in between exhibits and things at the moment,
Okay.
and gearing up. So that's probably the best place to start right there. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining our episode today on the Blue Palette podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, Joyful. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Palette podcast. This has been your host, Joyful Enriquez. If you would like to learn more info about ASMA, you can find them online at www.americansocietyofmarineartists.com and on all social media platforms.